So thanks for coming today. My name is Aaron Shaver, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for US Signal. And I'll give you just a quick background on US Signal to set some context for you. We've got lots of hecklers here from our company, so if you hear people shouting, it's probably just them. We're a data center services company, and there's been a lot of talk about cloud services and kind of how customers are approaching that. And we really partner closely with regulated and kind of healthcare, finance industry to help put in data center and cloud transition strategies. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about what our experience has been with them and how companies are tackling that, and a little bit about what we've learned. Prior to being at US Signal, I was actually the CIO for community hospitals for a large regional health system in Michigan. So I have some experience kind of with mergers and acquisitions in healthcare, and how we take corporate IT departments and transition them into offering new services. What that looks like financially, what it looks like from a human resources perspective, and what it looks like from a technology perspective as well. So here's what we're going to look at today. What's the value of corporate IT now? So that might be a little bit controversial in this room, but I'd like to take a look at that and what does corporate IT do for a company today? Where are we? How did we get here? And how are we doing? What does the next iteration of an IT strategy look like? How does an organization adapt to a new landscape? Technical malfunction there. And what does a phased approach look like? So this is a little bit new. You hear kind of the buzzword of a digital enterprise thrown around, and that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But essentially, a digital enterprise is when we've taken all the analog or all the manual processes that were done in the past, and we've successfully digitized them. It's a pretty simple definition. And we've been on, depending on when you started or what organization you're in, we've been on a 40-ish year process of digitizing enterprises. And there are companies today who are legacy companies, these are not startup businesses, who have successfully digitized, I'll say 90+% of their enterprise. So 90% of the business activities that they do, whether it's manufacturing or healthcare or banking, is all done in an electronic system. And so that, it was kind of interesting. I was thinking when the last speaker was talking, and he was talking about shifts of power inside of, our world, our countries. There's been a shift of power inside corporations as well. When we talk about what we're seeing a lot now is in organizations, as you kind of move up through the organization, it used to be that a chief operating officer is who became the CEO of a hospital. When that transition happened. What we're seeing more and more that it's the chief information officer that makes that transition to CEO. And kind of that shift of power of who knows what and how things are happening inside of an organization is changing. And that's really where technologists, however you look at that, are the ones that are helping to create and lead and transform all of the activities that happen inside the business, not just at a transactional level, not just in operations of IT, but at the tactical level, how things are managed inside the organization, and at a strategic level of how we serve our customers and what kind of products and services we sell. And there's a variety of different strategies that have been used in the past. So how many of you have ever experienced decentralized IT operations? You're probably familiar with centralized IT operations. Anybody live in healthcare or elsewhere that has decentralized IT operations? Do you guys know what that is? Have you seen it before? So decentralized IT, there are places who actually get rid of their IT department. They don't outsource it, but they take the IT department, they carve it up, and they put an IT person inside of each business unit or each department. And that's popular in healthcare and education. You look at large educational entities, and a lot of them have decentralized IT. They still have some centralized IT services, but there's IT specialists out in all the different areas. How many folks in bimodal IT? Anybody with a bimodal IT strategy? You have some people focused on keeping the lights on infrastructure, on data center operations. You have other people that are focused on innovation and developing new software and new platforms, take two different approaches to it. How many have heard of a cloud-first strategy? Yeah, anybody have a cloud-first strategy? You better raise your hand, Jim. No? Okay. So we're going to take a look at some of these today and what they mean. So as we've worked with companies, and I've spent a lot of time in organizations that are adapting to change, I really like the kind of mode 1, mode 2 nomenclature about what organizations are doing. So if we think back to the dawn of time as it relates to IT, I'm calling mode 1 because technology. We did things because of technology, because of what technology did for us. We bought stuff and kept it running. That's when I started in IT. I was speaking at a security conference a little while ago. I implemented my first firewall in 1996. I've been working in IT security since then. We bought stuff and implemented it. That's what IT did. We really had very little to do with what the organization was doing as far as their business. We were technologists. Then we moved to what I'm calling mode 1 dominant. Okay? We were still pretty much a mode 1 shop, but the technology drove the innovation inside the business. We would acquire new technology because it was a differentiator inside of healthcare or inside of manufacturing, and we could do something with that technology that our competitors couldn't do. But it was still because of technology. Then we've moved to a phase where I would argue is where we're at, or where we're as a whole, where we're coming to, is innovation defines infrastructure. So we're saying we need to be able to do certain things inside of our business. And we know we're fully digitized, so it's going to happen on technology. So design infrastructure, whether that's software or hardware, that can accomplish these types of things. And then when we're fully in mode 2, it's a sole focus on our consumer. And what does our consumer do, and what kind of experience do they have with it? And this is where it gets a little bit unfair. If you're a startup, you can jump all the way to that end, okay? And we see a lot of organizations that do that, and we'll look through them in a little bit here. But if you're a legacy IT department and you exist somewhere along this scale, if you know that what your consumer expects, if you know that in order to be successful as an organization, you have to move towards this other end of the spectrum, how do we get from one end to the other? We can't just stop today. We've really got to kind of overhaul the plane while it's in flight. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience with other companies and what has happened. And so I like to use this as kind of a frame of reference. And I think understanding the line of innovation and where it currently exists today is important for an organization. And feel free to agree or disagree as we go along. Certainly you guys have perspectives on this I'd love to hear about as well. But really, this line of innovation, unless you're a service provider or a software company, like a Zerto, for example, you're probably not going to be writing your own software or creating your own storage platforms or your own hypervisor. If you do, that's fantastic. But that's not realistic for most organizations. And so really where the innovation happens for their organization is above this line. So databases, middleware, and applications is really where they serve their customers. Everything that happens below that line of innovation is about infrastructure. And there are different types of knowledge premiums in those areas. Obviously, if you're operating a data center, below that line of innovation, technical knowledge is at a premium. How we implement solutions, how we maintain high availability, how we do disaster recovery are extremely important. Above that line of innovation is where institutional knowledge is at a premium. How your business works, how you serve your consumer is more important in that area than how technology works. Because above that line, the technology needs to be designed specifically to meet the consumer's demands. And so this is something that we see that's a little bit different. So we're working with some really large healthcare retail organizations that are going through these transitions. And this is kind of how we start to see the strategies pivot just a little bit. So 100%, what I've put here is 100% focus on solving problems through technical innovation. So what does that look like? A trend towards acquiring finished goods as opposed to raw materials. Right? So there was a day where IT they bought raw materials and they were a service provider back to the organization. That's what we did in IT. That's what I did for a long time. We bought raw materials, we put them together into a solution, we provided that solution to the business based on whatever requirements they had given us. I don't know how many projects I've worked on that we developed a solution and we implemented it based on a flawed understanding of what the business actually needed. a lot of times the business units can't articulate to us what they need in order for us to successfully design a solution for them. So looking at more towards acquiring a good that's already finished for the business as opposed to buying raw materials and building it yourself. A huge focus right now, and this is across all industries that we work with, is reducing the cost of non-innovative technology. There's a big difference between just lowering the total cost of ownership of IT, right? That can happen across this whole stack, and that is an initiative here. But really, it's shifting the costs from the non-innovative to the innovative areas, because that's really what can create business differentiators and drive value for an organization. And then the third one is refocusing human, material, and financial resources above the line. So that's a big question that's asked with cloud services or with consuming, finished goods is, what do we do with the people that work in this area? So working in healthcare, and I know I was in a session earlier, and there were some folks that were talking that they'd been with their organization for, 20, 30, 40 years. That represents a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge about an organization, about how you care for your patient, how you provide whatever materials you manufacture, how you handle your clients for banking or whatever the industry might be. And so that's really what we're starting to see is a trend of taking that institutional knowledge and rather than using it to deliver the technical services as far as keeping the storage arrays running, but really help those the IT departments become solution architects for the organization. I was working with a large retail chain up in the Midwest. I don't know if you guys are, any of you are from the Midwest, but they've got about 350 stores. And we were working on this transition, and one of the we were talking about this whole idea of stuff. It's IT's job to buy stuff and put it in place. And one of the things that they said is, and this is a group of 11 architects, enterprise architects that I'm working with, and they said, Aaron, we've got stuff. We've got all kinds of stuff. We've always had stuff, and we can buy more stuff if we need it. What we don't know how to do is take all that stuff and get what our business needs for our consumers, and we're starting to lose. We're losing to Amazon. We're losing to other online retailers that have created an environment. I was just talking to our sound guy back here. I hate to pick on you a little bit, but I said, hey, do you have to sit here and listen to all the presentations all day? And he's like, no, I can order stuff off Amazon. Right? That's great, right? Well, I can tell you he's not ordering stuff from this retailer that I'm talking about right now. And it's not because they don't have enough storage arrays. It's not because they don't have enough servers. It's not because they don't have enough enterprise architects. But they're not meeting their customers' need the way that we now expect to. And so how do they take those technologists that have a ton of institutional knowledge about their business and refocus them on solving the problems for their customer? How does this retail chain stay relevant when we can sit at our computer and just order stuff online? And that's just one example of it. So those are three things that people are focusing on: acquiring finished goods, reducing the cost of non-innovative technologies, and refocusing the resources. So what do we do? Let's take a look at a couple of the leaders. And I'm not going to focus on the Amazons and the Ubers. That's an unfair equation. I'm going to look at a couple other ones. How many of you are familiar with Domino's Pizza? Yes, he's very familiar. Okay, I love it. So Domino's Pizza is based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, okay? And they are a legacy pizza company, right? And I don't know if you've seen any of their commercials. At one point, their CEO actually got on a commercial and said that their pizza sucked. Does anybody remember seeing that at all? You do? Yeah. Yeah, right. Okay. I'm glad you're here today. So one of the things, I will use Amazon just briefly here. Jeff Bezos, in a letter he sent out to kind of his annual communication to his employees, he said, here's a starter pack of essentials for day one defense. So the idea is, and his premise is, that after day one, when you get to day two in your company, you start dying. And you start dying when you no longer focus on what your consumer needs, when you become about process. And I can tell you I've worked in a lot of huge IT departments, and it's all about process. So day one defense: customer obsession, a skeptical view of proxies, the eager adoption of external trends in high-velocity decision-making. And that's one of the things that we used to have in IT departments. When these were new foundational components was high-velocity decision-making. And I don't know how many times I've sat in organizations that can't get out of their own way to try new things and implement new technologies that they know are right, that they know will help them. They can't make the decisions because they've become so bureaucratic. So we'll look at Domino's Pizza just a little bit. So a little bit of history on Domino's. They've got about 15,000 locations throughout the world. They had a new CEO that came in, we'll talk about him a little bit, that kind of redefined them from a pizza company to a pizza delivery company, and that's an important focus. And they're actually now the 5th largest e-commerce site in the world. How many of you, I know you have, so you can't answer your question. How many of you have used the Domino Pizza Tracker before? Okay, that's pretty good. In a room this size, to have like a quarter of you who have used the Domino Pizza Tracker. I brought this up in a presentation once, and there was a very energetic fellow like we have here today. That was like, sometimes I order pizza just because I want to watch the tracker. And it's interesting. For those of you who haven't seen it, this is like a huge, I think it's awesome. Like, you put your pizza order in, and it's not just like, thanks, Aaron, we got your pizza order. You actually get this timeline, and it's like a visual timeline. And they're like, okay, I'll pick on Jim. Jim has picked your order. Jim's making your pizza. Jim's putting your toppings on. Your pizza just went into the oven. Your pizza just came out of the oven. Amanda just grabbed your pizza and is going to deliver it. It'll be there in 17 minutes based on the mapping that they did. And I'm like, holy crap, I'd rather have, that pizza's easy to order, right? And, you know, obviously there was quality issues of the product and everything. But that was a hard thing if you get into it and you talk to some of the folks that work at Domino's. That's a really hard pivot to make. Because they had to keep the business running. They couldn't just shut down Domino's Pizza one day and be like, we're not going to make any pizzas. We're not going to run IT operations, and we're just going to come up with new, cool ways of doing things. So how do you manage that? How do you take a company that's about to fail like Domino's Pizza is and turn it into one of the most innovative technology companies in the world now? And they're actually, what's interesting is they're selling this technology to all kinds of businesses now that want to have that kind of integration with their customers that have nothing to do with pizza. It's kind of like Amazon, and you know, who would have thought 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you know, when we were all first starting to fiddle around with Amazon, that they'd become the largest cloud hosting company in the world. I mean, it's interesting the kind of innovation that can really drive when you focus, like Mr. Hayden was talking about, when you focus on doing the right thing and you focus on solving a problem for your customer. So we've got some challenges here, though, because we're not startups. We don't get to just sit down day one. Well, maybe some of us are. I shouldn't speak for everybody. But in legacy IT, we're not startups. We don't just get to sit down with a great idea and try to build out the use case and see if it works. We have to take an existing organization and help it pivot. We can't just stop what we're doing. We have to continue our legacy operations. We still have to implement all the services in all the ways that we did previously. We don't have the resources to just build out 2 different environments. We can't have 2 completely separate IT departments. We can't have, you know, 2 completely redundant production environments. In some cases, we don't know what our customers want. If you look at healthcare, and I spent a number of years in healthcare, they got so much about day 2 operations, this idea of losing focus on what the customer needs and focusing on what the process is. You would sit down in focus groups and they couldn't even identify what their customers actually wanted from them anymore. That's a big problem, and that's a big problem in all kinds of organizations, not just healthcare. So how do we know what our customers want from us? We can't make it in one big jump. We don't just get to say we got a new cloud-first strategy or a new bimodal strategy or whatever it is and just click our fingers and make it happen tomorrow. And for a lot of us, we don't even get to make those kind of decisions. How do we move that up the food chain inside of our organization? So here's what we've seen working. One of the things we have to do is, how many of you guys work in an IT department? Like half of you. Okay. How many of you work in an IT department for a company that's not a startup? Like it's older than 5 years or so, I'd say. Okay. All right. So especially some of them that are very old, the way all of these environments have been built is just one tiny layer at a time. It's 1,000 of individual decisions that have been bolted together into this massive monolithic environment. So how do you take a piece of it and move it? How do you refocus the people? How do we reduce the non-innovative expenses? We need to be able to do some of this high-velocity decision-making, implement immediate solutions. We can't always wait years and years and fit into budget cycles and still be able to meet up with what our consumers are looking for. And there are ways to marry those up and re-leverage existing assets. And this is where we've put this idea together with customers. And it's fairly new. It's in its early adoption stages, but helping customers put together service portfolios. And there's been catalogs, right? We've had the idea of we create a private cloud or a public cloud, and developers or IT people can just go in and consume services from it. But it's a little bit different from that. So one of the, I'll call it sociological things that's been true in IT for a long time is, as technologists, and I'm guilty of this as well, is we created a really horrible process for asking the market for something that we want. And we call that a request for proposal. How many of you guys have to do RFPs? Not very many. Okay, that's great. I envy you. So in large organizations, a lot of times you have to do RFPs. And I think an RFP is a terrible way to ask for what it is that you really need. Because what we do is we take all the speeds and feeds that we want, we put it down on a piece of paper, and we send it out to our vendors, and we ask for responses from them. And oftentimes they have better ways of doing things than what we actually asked for. And so what we're trying to help IT departments do is, and excuse me, let me back up a little bit. One of the ideas of an RFP is that you're going to evaluate different technologies or different solutions side by side by side. And you're going to put them all together, and oftentimes we build out a scorecard, and with that scorecard we look at all the different attributes from cost and security and performance and availability and all the other things. And the goal of all that is to pick the perfect solution. And the idea of a service portfolio operates on the premise that there isn't a perfect solution that exists. And that's true whether it's for storage, that's true whether it's for data centers, that there's going to be a whole variety of different solutions that you need implemented, and that's going to change over time. And so what we believe is that we're going to need all 4 of these things. And you can argue there could be 5, there could be 3, there's going to be different blends for different customers. But a good service portfolio strategy is going to include some on-premise component. And there's a variety of different reasons for that. A co-location component, an enterprise cloud component, and a public cloud component. And that doesn't mean that you're going to put stuff in all 4 of those things. That means that you're going to have all 4 of those options in your strategy as you evaluate the needs of the business. And as we build this out, we create a risk profile for it. So we look at what's the security that gets applied to it, what are the backups, what are the disaster recovery, what are the costs associated with it, and what kind of risk management tolerance do we have on that area. And then what that allows us to do is start to unbolt an IT environment. So we work with a lot of companies that are 1,000+ virtual machines. You don't just pick up 1,000 virtual machines and move them one day to the new perfect solution. Because one of the things that I've found is when we buy technology, we usually buy it for a 3 or 5 year period. Do you guys relate to that? Is that kind of how it works in your organization? How many of you can predict what your technology needs to look like in 5 years? No takers? No? So who wants to be the person, the guy or gal that goes back to the CFO that says, hey, remember that business case I made 2.5 years ago to buy that new storage array? Yeah, well, we kind of need something different now. How do you feel about depreciating that asset? How do you feel about writing off that investment that we didn't have on it? I don't want to be that person. And we know that the technology changes faster than the acquisition, the life cycle of the technology. And so we think it's really important to have a service portfolio where you can move back and forth across a variety of different technologies when you need to. That moves us back to that high velocity decision making that we were talking about. If you're married to a particular storage array for 5 years and you don't get to change, or you got to take your lumps going back and asking for something different, how are you going to make high velocity decisions inside your organization? So what does the future look like? We're seeing a lot of organizations convert their corporate data centers into what we call service hubs. So this is, when we talk about data classification and data custody and how we manage all that, and we're happy to get into all the specifics, we're seeing a lot of organizations maintain their security perimeters, okay? So whether that's keeping the data warehouse inside of their corporate data center or just the security apparatus inside there, but then start connecting users and customers with all of these different items in their service portfolio. And the organizations are starting to convert those data centers into this type of services hub as opposed to it being the location where all technology lives. And that helps us manage the quality of service, it helps us manage the security, it helps us manage the data custody, and still allow the users, whether it's developers or end users or customers, to access all the technologies that are needed. Helps us control shadow IT and a lot of other things. So we're starting to build this out. So existing data centers are being transitioned into service hubs. We don't see them as that central repository anymore. Existing equipment in a lot of cases is transitioned to co-location. It's expensive to operate a data center. There were a lot of data centers that were built 10 to 15 years ago. They support very low power densities. It's time for new UPSs, it's time for new transformers, it's time for new generators. A lot of them have flat roofs that need to be replaced now, and it's more cost effective to move it into co-location. Up to a certain scale, you get about the 50,000 square foot range, it doesn't make as much sense, but there are a lot of data centers out there that are less than 50,000 square feet. Legacy applications are being moved to enterprise cloud. So one of the challenges we see is a lot of large organizations have applications that they didn't write, that aren't built or haven't been upgraded to be able to move to a public cloud and take advantage of microservices and other things. And so with enterprise cloud services that you'll find from, there's a lot of folks, iLand's here, we saw Peak 10 and TierPoint, and there's a lot of them out there that are more the enterprise cloud providers. There are a lot of legacy applications that are being moved into enterprise cloud because you can get, I'll say 80-ish% of all the benefits of the cloud services with about 20% of the work of rewriting your application to move it into a public cloud environment. So we see a lot of things moving that way. And then applications that are net new or are being redeveloped get moved into a public cloud environment like an AWS or an Azure that can take advantage of some of the efficiencies but also be written for some of the nuances associated with a public cloud environment. So what does a phased transition look like? So here's some of the key attributes we see from companies that are doing this successful. One is stop trying to evaluate solutions and pick the perfect one. Start being a consultant for your business and putting together a portfolio that has many different choices that you can move back and forth between. So you can take advantage of them today, but you know that you can change tomorrow if you need to. Develop a service portfolio that gives you a lot of different options. If you're a consultant to the business now instead of an internal service provider, when they bring you needs, you got to have a lot of tools in your tool bag. You're not necessarily going to have the time to go build all the technology and deploy it yourself. So how do you take advantage of those? How do you know the security associated with it, the performance, the cost, the availability, interior applications associated with it? The most successful organizations we see are creating a technical risk management process. Risk management isn't just done on the financial side anymore. We actually have a process with objective and subjective criteria that we look at so that we know when we have an application, this is a candidate to go in the public cloud, or it's a candidate to go in enterprise cloud or co-location. I like to use the analogy, we have a fair amount of marketing material at our organization, as you can imagine. We actually pay money for people to be able to see that information. How much security do we need on that versus the health system who has to protect a customer's record, right? Those should be treated at different levels. They have different security requirements and thus should have different solutions associated with them. Implement a reference architecture for a services hub. How do you start taking the assets that you have today and make them an avenue that your users and that your customers can access all the services that they need versus just saying, here's everything that can be provided out of this data center. If you can't get it here, you have to go somewhere else. That's where we've had shadow IT develop. because when they couldn't get the services that they wanted out of the data center or the IT department, they'd go off on their own. So how do you create the IT department and the services hub that allow your consumers to access all the things that they need while still keeping your arms wrapped around it and know what data is moving in and out, when and where it's going, and how to secure it? And then what we do is, once we have all those things in place, we start to pick initial workloads that we can unbolt from the environment. This isn't the traditional method where we'd say, okay, we're going to move all storage out. We're going to look at a workload or an application, and then we're going to pair the right DR with it. We're going to pair the right security with it, and we're going to try to unbolt that from the whole monolithic environment to move it into the service portfolio. So we'll look at an example here. Fortune 500 furniture manufacturer. They've got a 3-year timeline, and this is their strategy. These are not my words. They need to implement a new BCDR plan. They need to avoid capital expenditure on new equipment and data center improvements. They don't have the capital to spend on it. They want to shut down their existing data center. So year one, this is what's happening. Redevelop 20% of their workloads to move into the public cloud. They're moving them into AWS. But that takes rewriting the code to work in a public cloud environment. 70% of their workloads are moving into co-location, and 10% of their workloads, they're going through an app rationalization process and eliminating those workloads. So these are the strategic goals that they have set. Year two, they're going to take 10% of the co-location environment and move it to enterprise. Excuse me, that's labeled wrong. 10% of the co-location environment and move that out to public cloud. So they're going to redevelop some more apps in year two. They're going to take 40% of what's in co-location and move it out to enterprise cloud. And then in year three, they're going to move the rest of it from co-location into enterprise cloud. And that means all their equipment, all their servers, all their storage arrays, all their network gear has been fully depreciated at that point. Nobody has to go back to the CFO and take a black eye and say, we need to throw this gear away. We've given them a way to get off of the merry-go-round without having a net increase in IT expenditures. There's actually a net decrease, and they're still able to leverage all of the investments that they've made to date. So we'll do a quick recap here. So from a strategic perspective, what can we do? Because one of the things we found is that no organization successfully makes this type of strategy transformation without activities happening at all three of these levels. Can't just do it operationally, can't just do it strategically. So one of the things you have to do from a high level, reposition IT as an expert, as a fully vested solution architect in the organization. I was talking to a customer the other day, and I was querying them about what their customers need as it relates to DR for a particular application that they have. And they said, well, we don't know. We'll have to go back and ask the business. And I said, you need to stop saying that. You are the business. You don't get to just say, I'm in IT. I don't know what the business needs anymore. I've got to go ask them. We have to reposition, start to understand how the business works, how the IT services are used, and how our consumers use them. Establish a new problem-solving mission. So once you understand how the organization works and you understand what their problems are and what the consumer's problems are, then that's where we as technologists get to do what we love, which is solve problems with technology for them. But it's a different focus. From a tactical perspective, we develop and implement that service portfolio that we were talking about. This is where we go out and look at all of our different options. Right? What's our public cloud option? Do we have one or more? What's our enterprise cloud option? Do we have one or more? How do we co-locate things when we need to? And what services actually get delivered out of our on-premise data center? Then we work on refocusing people. So we have a huge investment in that institutional knowledge that we were talking about. We have a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge about our business. How do we start to focus them on solving business problems versus keeping the lights on inside IT? And then from an operational perspective, we start to implement that services hub reference architecture that we talked about. Looks a little bit different for every organization. And then we start unbolting and transitioning workloads against that risk management model that we talked about. So starting to part things out a little bit. And this is actually one of the use cases we have for Zerto a lot, is helping customers with those migrations. Once they decide, because Zerto lines up really nice, when you look at a VPG, usually a VPG and an application workload happen to kind of line up pretty nicely for customers that need to start unbolting things. And then we can use Zerto to help shift those around to the different areas inside the service portfolio. I think for us, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, Zerto has become as much of an enablement tool to help customers move their workloads around as it has been a DR tool for us as well. All right, so I like this quote. So this is from Patrick Doyle. He's the new CEO of Domino's Pizza. Everyone sees the results of a move gone bad, and few see the costs of a move not made. Because the pain of a loss is double the pleasure of winning, so the natural inclination is to be cautious, even in situations that demand creativity. And personally and professionally, that kind of hit home with me. I think there's a lot of times where we do what we've always done because it's comfortable and we don't want to take the risk to do something different. And we know that legacy organizations are really being challenged. When we think back to the idea of, that Mr. Hayden was talking about, of centralized power, there were a lot of big institutions inside of our societies, whether it's healthcare or manufacturing, big corporations that did have power centralized. And what we're seeing now is consumers shifting away from them because of this whole idea of the lateral power. They can make movements quicker and deliver services that are more favorable to the consumer. And we see large organizations, or I should say more mature organizations, shedding customers like crazy. And so we can't be cautious in some of these areas. There is some analysis or paralysis by analysis that happens, and we've got to make some of those high velocity decisions to continue to meet the needs of our customers. So I put this up here as a joke because I hate these slides at the end of presentations. But I'll pause for a minute and see if you guys have any questions. Otherwise, I've got some questions for you about what you're doing in your organizations. Any pizza questions? No? No? Does this make sense to you guys so far? All right, so we'll look at a couple questions here. How many of you feel that you're in touch enough with your customers' challenges to try and find the right solutions? Well, sure it is. Yeah, that's my job. Do you guys feel like, as IT professionals, do you feel like you're in touch with your end consumer and how they use the technology that you're building, what it means to them? Nobody's brave enough to answer that? Okay. Well, you just answer them inside your head, okay? I'll keep going through them. And has anybody developed or implemented an IT strategy similar to this, kind of building out the service portfolio and putting in that place to have a lot of options inside your IT environment? Nobody. Okay? From a tactical perspective, has anybody been able to tier out their workloads? We talk about that a lot in DR. Anybody be able to tier out all of their applications so that they know what's tier 0, tier 1, 2, 3? Anybody successfully complete that? What's that? It's all the same? It's all assumed? Okay. All right. Fair enough. Everything's tier 1? Until you have to pay for it, and then it's not tier 1 anymore, right? You just redefine what tier 1 is? Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're fine. Yeah, I think the biggest, and this is coming from a service provider, plug your ears, Steve. I think the biggest mistake they make is trying to choose a service provider. Different service providers specialize in different things. They have different capabilities. My argument is that the day of there being one right answer is over, right? You're going to need multiple service providers. You're going to need public cloud. You're going to need private cloud. You're going to need enterprise cloud. And you got to know how to consume them and when. It's doing the investment work ahead of time and coming up with the understanding of, okay, this is where enterprise cloud fits, and this is where public cloud fits. This is the difference between AWS and Azure, and why one workload makes sense here and the other one makes sense there. They're not just the same thing that are competing against each other. But that's been our approach in IT forever is, well, all things being equal, let's look at them side by side and pick the best one. Well, best is subjective. Best to the CFO is going to be the one that costs the least, right? Best to the database administrator is going to be the one that has the fastest storage I/O on it, right? Best to the CIO is going to be the one that gives them the most strategic flexibility. So best is subjective, and I think that's the biggest mistake when picking a service provider, is that we just get back into the same area of let's find the best one and pick them. All right, so has anybody implemented kind of a reference architecture to kind of rein in shadow IT and start to provide, a variety of different services to the organization? Anybody? Paul has. Paul just raised his hand. No, okay. He was telling me I'm running out of time. All right, so here's what we'll look at. Some things for you guys to consider as you approach this. I've got some documentation that I'd share with you on kind of the 3 phases that organizations go through as they make these types of transitions, right? First phase kind of being, how do you look at all the different providers and learn about them and evaluate cloud services? Often that's an internal development phase. The second one is kind of how do you build out the strategy inside your organization? How do you document it? How do you do the total cost of ownership analysis? How do you create the presentations for IT management, for executive management, for the board to help educate them on it? And then the third phase of it is how do you start to implement this iteratively over a 3 or 5 year period? So I'm happy to share that with you. Security analysis tool that we've put together that kind of helps organizations look at information security instead of a compliance perspective or a super detailed vulnerability scan or penetration test, a security scorecard, if you will. It's kind of a report card, rather, that shows the overall health of a security apparatus inside of an organization. A lot of customers have found that really healthy. What I put here, legit total cost of ownership. My pet peeve is total cost of ownership. I kind of hate them because anybody can make them say anything depending on what agenda you have. But we've put together a lot of tools. You can take them for what they are that include, like how do you do a facilities analysis if you're looking at your own data center versus another one. In these other areas as well, backup, archival, DR, information security. So if you're interested in that. One of the other mistakes that we see a lot of folks happen, because tiering out your workloads is one of the biggest ways to save money, honestly, if you don't treat everything as tier 0 or tier 1. We see organizations traditionally, they approach this as once they see the value of tiering out their workloads, they say, okay, we're going to sit down in a room and close the door and we're going to tier out all our workloads. I've never seen that work. There's never a consensus developed among anybody about how much it should cost or who should do it, or what technology should be put in place. So we've got a pretty good body of work on what's available, kind of what are the industry standard tiers, what are the recovery time objectives associated with them, the cost, the security, so forth. You can use that. And then this is one we spend a lot of time on, is developing and presenting a defensible IT strategy to upper management. There's so many times we've sat in meetings with IT, could even be with the CIO, and we come up with a great strategy for approaching how we save money and do things better, and it never gets off the ground because we need to be able to present this in a variety of different perspectives to a variety of different stakeholders. So we're happy to share those tools with you guys as well if you need them. All right, any other questions? You guys are a quiet bunch. It's just that awesome of a presentation, huh? All right, sounds good. Well, thanks for your time today. I'm happy to answer questions if you guys want to chat a little bit afterwards, but thanks for your time.